Well, welcome to Family for Life for all of you who are here live here in Berlin, Ohio, and those of you who are watching online. We're excited that you decided to join us this Sunday evening for a very unique experience. So the last 18 years of Marriage for Life, we focused on building marriages, but then we realized that you can't have a healthy family without a healthy marriage, and you can't have a healthy marriage without a healthy family. So we decided to launch into this Family for Life experience and help you as parents, grandparents, or in this case, also just some individuals who love kids and want God's best for kids. And there's a chance tonight as well. There's some people internationally working with kids in cities who are living by themselves in some foreign lands. We're glad you joined us as well. So I just want to share a little bit. One of the great proverbs that we talk about when we were building families is train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. There's no children watching this, but there's children that will be affected by this. And one thing I learned as a kid is that I always need to turn to the Father for guidance. So my parents trained me up in that way. So in some ways, I'm still being trained by my father because of what my parents trained me to do. So tonight in this training that we're a part of, we're going to lean into our speaker, but also through him, lean into the Father and learn how to be better stewards of the children God has placed in our lives, whether they're kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, or just kids around our town, around our school we care about deeply. Regardless of the situation, this is something God's going to lean us into. So I'm going to invite to the stage right now our guest speaker. This is Justin Myers. He's with Show Hope, who is founded by Stephen and Mary Beth Chapman. I got to meet her a few months ago. Stephen Curtis and Mary Beth Chapman. And he's out of Franklin, Tennessee. And I'm going to have him introduce a little bit about what he does. And he's going to guide us through this journey tonight. And while he's speaking, every now and then, besides his slides that we're showing on there, you're going to see a phone number flash up on the screen. Pat, can you go ahead and throw that up there? This is our Marriage for Life phone number. And throughout tonight, whether you're live or watching online, you can text us any questions that you might have for Justin throughout the night. And then halfway through this evening, we'll have a little Q&A with him, and then he'll speak for some more. And then we'll have another Q&A at the end, taking your questions that you give. So don't be shy about asking questions, because just like when we were growing up in school, there's always that kid who asks the questions because you were afraid to ask it yourself. Don't be that person. Be the one asking questions. And we'll go on this journey together, and we'll get done promptly at 8 o'clock so you can get back to your families for the rest of the evening. So as we start, Justin, let's pray. Father, I thank you for allowing us to go on this journey tonight. A very unique journey with a lot of new information, but it's information for people we care about deeply. So as we've prayed before we've started this evening, we pray your anointing over Justin, that he would not just speak words of information and knowledge, but they'd be Spirit-filled, that it would lead us and guide us and change our perspective on how we deal with parenting some kids that we care about so deeply, who in many cases have been through so much. And I pray because of tonight, these families be better, these parents be better, that your kingdom here on earth would be better. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Justin, it's yours. Thanks for being here tonight.
All right, thanks, Bo. Okay, so Bo, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you again for having me today. I'm going to make a couple of introductions myself. So we're actually going to start with who's here in the chair with me. So this is Rooney, and this belongs to my 13-year-old, almost 14-year-old daughter, Hosanna, who's in that picture that you see on the screen. And this is Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z, who belongs to Asher, who's in the picture, and he's my 13-year-old son. Anytime I go on a trip somewhere, they send representatives of themselves with me. So just so you know, they are here with us in Rooney and Piccolo. And then we also have Bonnie, who's my wife of 17, nearing 18 years. And I'm going to be honest, this picture is not recent. But yes, it is one of my favorite pictures because, gosh, I had hair. And so we'll just leave that at that. Another introduction. So Bo mentioned Show Hope. So I work for an organization called Show Hope, and our mission is to care for orphans by engaging the church and reducing barriers to adoption. And we seek to address financial, medical, and knowledge barriers to adoption. We do that through our programs. Adoption aid and medical care grants address that financial barrier, and medical care grants also address that medical barrier. TBRI practitioner scholarships, Hope for the Journey, which is a training platform that we have, and Pause Campaign, which is a resource that we've developed specifically for students to help them develop a worldview of caring for orphans and vulnerable children. These are all programs and resources that we have to aid families that are engaging in adoption. And then it just has wider impact also on foster care as well. So before we move into our formal presentation, I know that I got the time slot right after dinner. You know, it's either 2:30 in the afternoon or it's after dinner. Those are dangerous times. And the sun is starting to go down, so it's a little bit hard on us. So if you're able, I want you to stand up where you're at. If you're watching from home or from another location, I want you to do this with us too. And I want you to turn to the person next to you. And I hope that this simultaneously embarrasses and encourages you. So just hope you're ready, okay? So I want you to turn to your left and to your right and either give them a handshake or a fist bump and say, I'm glad you're here tonight. Okay, we got some hugs going on too. That's great. Make sure that the person you're hugging is okay with the hug, okay? Let's just with permission, right? Okay, and then I want you to look at me. And as we start tonight, I want you to listen to me. God is a good parent to you. You are a good parent. You're a good grandparent. You're a good uncle or auntie. You're a good school teacher. All of these ways that you're ministering to children, it matters. And you're doing a good job. Now, the reason I know that, and the reason that I can say that confidently, is not just to boost your ego. Actually, it's not to boost your ego at all. It's because you showed up, and because you are willing to learn and to engage and to say, if there's some other way that I can do it even better, I want to know. So the fact that you're here tonight, the fact that you're listening or watching tonight, means that you're a good parent and that you love your kids. So embrace that and let's go. So you can have a seat. If you're watching online, you can have a seat as well. Okay, so what we're going to hit in this first session is a few things. We're going to define relational trauma. And we are going to talk about the 5 B's of relational trauma. We're going to talk about an introduction to Trust-Based Relational Intervention, which I'll refer to as TBRI. We're going to talk about what our kids need and why it should matter to us. Okay, let's talk about a definition of relational trauma. So this is out of a textbook. So just consider that as we read it, but it is very comprehensive, so it's good to understand this. We will primarily use the terms victimization or relational trauma to refer to the range of maltreatment, interpersonal violence, abuse, assault, and neglect experiences encountered by children and adolescents, including familial, physical, sexual, emotional abuse and incest, community, peer, and school-based assault, molestation, and severe bullying, severe physical, medical, and emotional neglect, witnessing domestic violence, as well as the impact of serious and pervasive disruptions in caregiving as a consequence of severe caregiver mental illness, substance abuse, criminal involvement, or abrupt separation or traumatic loss. Now, you should wince when you hear that definition. That's hard to hear, isn't it? It's hard to read. And you may not experience any of that. The children in your care may not have experienced any of this, or they may have experienced some of this. But what I really want to highlight here, as we consider what some of the children in our care have faced, is abuse, neglect, witnessing domestic violence, which, as we know, is an epidemic in our culture, in our nation, disruptions in caregiving, and abrupt separation or traumatic loss within one's family. So hold those in your mind as we're considering this kind of trauma that impacts children. So we're going to talk about how trauma impacts the 5 B's. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the brain. Relational trauma impacts the developing brain so that it's organized around primitive survival mechanisms. So think fight, flight, freeze, as opposed to higher order processes that support learning, creativity, and healthy relationships. So we're stuck in the survival mode rather than the broader, higher order processes of relationships. We'll talk about how it affects biology. So through its impact on the brain, relational trauma impacts human biology through a variety of mechanisms, including activation of the stress hormone, which is called cortisol. That's actually normal in stress situations, suppression of an immune response, and alteration of epigenetic processes. Now, epigenetic, that's a big word, but it means from generation to generation, the effects that pass on through people to their children based on what they've faced in life. Okay, so brain, biology, and we're going to talk about the body. Relational trauma impacts the body by altering our sensory experience of the world, right? We live in bodies. We experience the world through our bodies. And just the experience of our body itself, okay? And then we're going to talk about behavior. I know this is the one that you showed up for. But it comes further down in the list. So the adverse impact of relational trauma, it will affect emotional, behavioral, cognitive self-regulation. So a person's ability to calm themselves down in a stressful situation. And children are often given multiple diagnoses like ADHD, PTSD, reactive attachment disorder, what we call RAD, oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, depression, and the list goes on, right? These are impacts that affect a child's behavior, the way they live and move in the world. And then we'll talk about beliefs. So since relational trauma represents breakdowns and disruptions of fundamental attachment processes, attachment, pay attention to that word, then relational trauma profoundly impacts beliefs and dispositions about the self. And we'll talk about those. Self-awareness, self-regulation, self-esteem, self-efficacy. All big words, but these are words that impact the children that we care for, and not just the children that we care for, but us too, as people that live in the world. Okay, so let's talk about the brain. All right, so you've heard the phrase, this is not rocket science, right? Have you all heard that? But this is brain science. So just pay really good attention, and then you're going to walk out of here really, really smart and able to impress your coworker or your neighbor tomorrow. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. So you see three things pointed out there on the slide. So we live in a sensory world, and we're constantly taking in information about our surroundings through the senses, right? And when our brains are developing appropriately, it looks like the following. You see the thalamus. It's right there in the middle arrow. It is what we call the cook, and it takes in all the sensory input from multiple sensations, our visual, our hearing, our touch, our smell, and it creates a unified sensory representation, what we call the ingredients that you bring together to create a tasty meal, if you will. And the thalamus then relays that information either to the amygdala, which you see there on the slide, the little red thing, for fast processing, or then it sends it to the medial prefrontal cortex. We'll call that the MPFC. Now, if it goes to the amygdala is like a smoke alarm. And it's considering, am I safe or am I not safe? Is there a threat? And if it determines that it's safe, then it's going to send it to the MPFC, which is the frontal lobe. That's going to take a longer time and a more considerate time thinking about how to respond to the situation or the senses that the body is taking in. Now, if the amygdala is used to perceiving threat and there being real threat, then it gets lots of practice. And the amygdala actually grows larger than a typical developing amygdala. And so when sensory comes in, then it's going to respond quickly, automatically. Now for a normally developing brain, if it's not really a threat, then it's going to go to the watchtower, which is that MPFC. And consider that like a fire ranger that's looking out from a fire tower. And he's considering, okay, there's a pocket of fire over here in this part of the forest. If I send these resources, I can take care of that. No reason to completely flip out, right? We've got the resources, we'll take care of that, and we'll move on. So an example of this, so consider that you're walking down the street and a car backfires. And you hear that loud popping sound, and it really sounds like a gunshot. But you're sitting there thinking, like, I don't think that would happen here, but I don't know. And then your friend comes up to you and says, hey, that was just that car. Did you hear it backfire when it drove by? And you say, oh, okay, that makes sense. And maybe your heart rate had started picking up, but then it slows down, and you're fine. You go on with the rest of your day. You may forget that even happened. Now, for somebody, let's say that you grew up in a neighborhood in which there was gun violence. And one day, your friend got hit by a grazing bullet and had to go to the hospital and was in the hospital for a while. So let's say you're walking down that same street, you hear that same noise, and it sounds like the gunshots that you've heard in the past. And so your immediate response is, I'm not safe. I have to get safe. And so you run behind a building and you're hiding behind a wall until you're figuring out what to do next. But your heart is racing, your pupils are dilated, maybe you're starting to sweat, and you're genuinely freaking out, like, who just got shot? And then your friend comes around and says, hey, that was just a car that backfired. Everything's fine. And you're still not sure, right? Because your body thinks that it was not a car. And so it takes you a while to cool down, right? And it's because of the experiences that you've had that led up to that caused you to interpret the situation as a threat when it wasn't really a threat. So for our children who have faced abuse, neglect, and loss, especially with their primary caregiver, they're predisposed to that fight, flight, freeze response. And the pathway to their amygdala, which is thinking, am I safe, am I not safe, is large, wide, and well-worn. So survival becomes their number one approach to life. So this is a picture of two brains, if you couldn't tell. Our brains don't actually look like that with all the red and yellow and everything. They actually look pretty boring. But when you scan them, then you can scan and see where the activity is at in the brain. So the brain on the right, if we're talking about the amygdala is used a lot in a child who's been maltreated or abused or neglected, then their amygdala is going to be used a lot, and their prefrontal cortex is not going to have much use. It's not going to be activated a lot. And that's actually what we see in this brain. A lot of the activity is back in the central bottom part of the brain, which is where the amygdala is at. If you look at the left, the healthy brain, a normally developing brain, as it's growing, will engage the prefrontal cortex, the higher thought processes. So it actually affects the developing of the brain. Trauma affects how the brain grows. Okay, let's talk about biology. So in the mid-90s, the CDC Kaiser Permanente conducted a study of adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs, and their correlation to later life health outcomes. The study included 17,000 participants, and it covered 10 areas of experience under the categories of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Now, if we zoom in on those three types of ACE, abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, consider your own history. And did you experience any of these situations? Now consider the child who might come into your home, or that you might care for in your Sunday school class, or in your classroom at school. How many ACEs do you think they have? How about your children or your grandchildren? Are they impacted by any of these ACEs? So in this study, they saw that the higher a person's score, the higher their risk was for mental health disturbances. I'm going to zoom in here so that you see those. So things like anxiety, depression, hallucinations, somatic health disturbances like sleep problems and obesity, inappropriate sexual activity like early intercourse, promiscuity, and stress and anger, perceived stress, poor anger management, and partner violence. So the higher the ACE score, the more likely that it was that as they grew, and especially into adulthood, that they would be predisposed to these kinds of activities and outcomes. Thankfully, this correlation is not determinative, especially the earlier the intervention is in somebody's life. So in summary, trauma not only impacts the brain, but it can have significant impact on the child's biology. Now we're going to talk about the body. So we know the five senses. We see those: sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. We learned those really well when we were kids, right? But there's actually considered 8 senses that we use to engage in the world. So you see the one that says movement. It's in the bottom left. That's our proprioception, which gives us the sense of space and our place in it. So another interactive moment here. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to think about where your left ear is. And then I want you to use your left hand to grab your left ear. Okay, you can open your eyes. Okay, it looks like everybody was able to successfully do that. That's your proprioceptive sense that allowed you to do that, to know where your ear was, even though you couldn't see it or you couldn't really determine your surroundings around you. Okay, so the one in the middle is balance. So let's say it's Labor Day weekend, you're out on a pontoon boat, and the waves are really choppy, and you get up and you want to walk from one side of the pontoon boat to the other. Now, if you did not have the balance, or what's called the vestibular sense, then you would just drop to the ground because you would not be able to handle the shaking of the boat. Your vestibular sense is what allows you to balance and rebalance with a changing environment. And then finally, interoception is an internal sense. It's what we feel in our organs inside our body. So when you're hot, when you're cold, if you didn't eat dinner tonight and you're feeling it now because your stomach is growling. All right, that's your interoception. Now, in children who have experienced trauma, their body's ability to integrate all those senses and produce an appropriate response is warped. So then children are either hypersensitive or hyposensitive. They either sense the world too much or not enough. And in some cases, both, which can be really confusing for the child and the caregiver. So first, let's talk about hypersensitive. So you see there it says that the volume is too loud. Now, when I say hypersensitive, when I was growing up, I heard that in a very derogatory sense. Maybe you did too. You were so hypersensitive. Just get over it. Calm down, right? That is not what I mean when I say hypersensitive. It is actually what the child is experiencing. So if you think that level 5 is the typical intensity that we sense the world through all of our senses, then a hypersensitive child is experiencing the world at a level 10. Some of their senses or all of their senses, maybe. And what we need to know is the child does not control this. And they're going to do whatever they can to tone down that sensory stimulation so that it's not overpowering, so that it literally does not hurt. We call these children, or what they're experiencing, sensory avoidance, right? If you're listening to a radio or somebody's playing their radio too loud and it's right next to you, what are you going to do? You're going to move away from it. You're going to say, can you turn that down? If they're not listening to you, you're going to pop that radio off the table. You're going to break the radio, right? Something has to change because it's too loud. You see on there some of the impacts to a child. So can't tolerate bright lights or loud noises. Clothing can be too itchy. Distracted by background noises that others don't seem to hear. Think about this child in the classroom. Teacher's talking, but so is somebody behind them. And it is really, really hard to pay attention to teacher right now because Bobby behind me is also talking. And I don't know who to pay attention to right now because I hear them both on the same volume. Some other things. Picky eaters because they simply can't handle the weird texture of a food. So if you're not considering the sensory challenges that your child is having, that last bullet point can really drive you crazy. And I don't know who makes the meals in your house, but if your child is constantly saying, I don't like that, I can't eat that, I'm sure it grates on you. They are not out to get you, okay? Please do not take personal offense. It's really that child just trying to figure out how to live in their environment. And so when you understand this is what this child is facing, it's going to still be hard to interact and help meet their needs, but it's going to give you more compassion. It's going to give you more patience as you try and figure out how to help them in that situation. Okay, so let's go the other direction. Hyposensitive. So if hypersensitive is experiencing the world at a level 10, then the hyposensitive child is experiencing the world at a level 1. This child's going to do whatever they can to get more sensory input. We call these children sensory seekers. And this can drive you crazy in a totally different way, right? The child that is clinging to you, the child that is touching every wall, every cat, every rock, right? They are trying to get more sensory stimulation so that they can understand what's going on in their world. Constant need to touch people and textures, even when it's not socially acceptable. Not understanding their personal space. Having trouble understanding their body and being clumsy, falling down. The force that they apply. So these children, when they're writing on paper, they might be breaking the pencil lead. Or when they're erasing, they may be using a whole eraser on one piece of paper and ripping that piece of paper apart. You think they're mad, and they just they're just trying to erase their answer. Have a highly extreme tolerance for pain, and very fidgety and unable to sit still. And what is our number one way to fix being fidgety? Sit still. Sit still. That does not lead to a good outcome, does it? And then love jumping, bumping, crashing activities. Enjoy deep pressure like tight bear hugs. Craves fast spinning and intense movement. And loves being tossed in the air. Anything that just gets them more sensory stimulation so that they can live well in their environment. Okay, so what sensory processing challenges are? There are difficulties in organizing that information. That child is just trying. It's often called sensory processing disorder. And it's often a common occurrence with things like ADHD or autism. It's just as important to say what sensory processing challenges are not. It's not kids being too sensitive, as if they need to grow up and get over it. It's not kids trying to do something to get under your skin or annoy you. It's not a sign they need more discipline. And these challenges and their manifestations are not always consistent. So like I said before, you could have the same child that is hypersensitive today and hyposensitive tomorrow. And then the next day goes back to hypersensitive. And then in the afternoon is hyposensitive. And you're just trying to catch up. And so is that child, right? They're just trying to figure it out. Okay, so what's your sensory profile? So we're talking about children, but all of us has a sensory profile. So just think about it. So who among us takes family trips? Anybody? Okay, I was getting ready to say you need to get out more. But so that picture that I showed you earlier, that was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We live in Nashville, Tennessee. Chattanooga is about 2 hours from us. We were taking a trip to Chattanooga, and I use the GPS religiously. Even if I know where I'm going, I still use the GPS, just in case there's a wreck or a detour, something. I just want to know, right? And so as we're getting closer, this happens to me every time. As we're getting closer to the destination, you know, the radio's going, everybody's chatting, everybody's having a good old time. I turn the radio down and I say, can you please be quiet? I'm looking for the right turn. And you think, hearing, but you're looking. And what I have begun to understand about myself is if I have too much stimulation, then I'm not going to be able to pay attention to where I need to turn. And so I got to turn down the stimulation so that I can focus on looking. That happens to all of us. We all get overwhelmed at times. Sometimes we're underwhelmed, and we need more engagement with our senses. Okay, so behavior. Now, this is not the first place that we started, but it's often the first thing that we see in a child who's experienced trauma. So behavior has a lot of consequences, but I think what we're most concerned and exhausted by is the impact that it has on relationships, right? Your relationship with your child, your relationship with your nephew, your relationship with your grandson, granddaughter. So let's go back to the beginning, and we're just going to learn for a moment about the attachment cycle. So you know this. You just may not have ever seen this complicated graphic, okay? But I'm just going to point out really quickly what this means. So on the right side of the graphic, you have HPA axis activation. You'll see that. You won't remember that after tonight. But maybe you'll remember cortisol release, right? We talked about that as a stress hormone before. When you have a newborn infant and they cry, what do? If you're here, you can respond. Yeah. Depending on the time of day, you may know exactly what they need. or you may not, but you're going to figure it out. They cry, you respond. You pick up that baby, you're patting the baby, right? You're cooing the baby. Oh, you're so beautiful, right? You're trying to calm that baby down. What do you need? Is it a diaper change? Do you need to eat? Do you need to take a 15-minute drive around in the car, right? So you can go back to sleep. Okay, and you're going to meet that need. It may not be the first thing you do, may not be the second thing you do, but you're going to keep going until you meet that need, okay? So that child has a stress response. They have a need. I'm hungry. Feed me. Somebody help. So they cry, and that stress hormone is released. You come, you pick them up. Oh, what's wrong? Oh, okay, you're hungry? Let me feed you. That's immediate comfort, right? That touch, that gentle voice, that patting, the food calms that child down, right? And so then that cortisol is worked out of the system. How many times does that happen in a child's life? Thousands. Thousands of times that you do that with your child, right? And we're talking about in a typical, normal developmental cycle. You're there for your child, okay? That child learns to trust you. She learns that when she uses her voice, you respond. When she asks for help, you meet the need. That's relationships 101. And that child is learning that as an infant. And they don't have to have words to express that. Okay, but in a disrupted cycle, the same thing happens in terms of the child expressing their need. Distress, waiting, nobody responds. Or their response is not immediate. Maybe it takes a long time. And so that child has no idea what's going on, right? Now, it disrupts their ability to regulate themselves. It disrupts their ability to form healthy relationships. They cannot and they will not trust others. Because when I ask for help, nobody responds. They learn that early. And what is so destructive about this disrupted cycle is that children are taught in these moments, the people who are nearest to me are the people I cannot trust. The people I should be able to trust are the ones I cannot trust. Think about how that impacts all of a child's relationships. If the ones who are supposed to be the safest are the ones bringing the most harm, then what do I do? How do I live in this world, right? So left untreated and unaddressed, children can experience intense behavioral needs, which oftentimes are compounded by our response to bring them back into line. So a child steps out of line, they disrespect you, all manner of behavioral responses, and you clamp down, it just reinforces what they already think of people. They're not trustworthy. They're not safe, right? These big behaviors can be labeled anxiety disorders, conduct disorders, regulatory disorders, and mood disorders. It's important to say that by admitting that a child is impacted like this by their trauma history is not to excuse their behavior. It simply gives us a context of the why and the need that a child is experiencing so that we know how to move in with compassion and patience to meet them where they're at. So it's not an excuse, but it just gives us more information so that we know how to care well for that child. Okay, beliefs. We're going to run through this one pretty quickly. So for a child impacted by trauma, their belief system is going to be disrupted. So a child's sense of self, you see self-esteem there, they're going to think things like, I'm trash. No one wants me. Just return me to the orphanage. Why don't you just get rid of me, right? Why don't you just fulfill what I already think that you think of me? Self-concept. This is the sense of our behaviors, characteristics, and abilities. I'm a bad person. I'm an idiot. I'll never be good at school. I suck at soccer. My teacher hates me. Right? Self-efficacy. So this is our sense of confidence in the face of challenges. Have you ever faced any challenges? Have you ever looked at that challenge and thought, man, that's scary, but I can do this? You have. But children who are impacted by trauma and who are knocked down time after time, when they look at a challenge, they think, I can't do it. Why even try? I'm just going to fail anyway. I always do. And then self-regulation. So this is our ability to keep our emotions and thoughts in check and appropriate for the situation. So when a child is impacted by trauma, they may have an oversized response to things that you and I think are just normal things. They get hungry. They get thirsty. They get tired. They lose a game. Sudden change in schedule, and so on. They can have an outsized response to that. They just don't have tolerance for situations that don't go the way that they didn't plan. So then what do our kids need? We call this the 3 pillars of trauma-wise care: felt safety, connection, regulation. This can be used in any context. So a child's felt safety is strengthened by caring, consistent adults who provide structure and predictability. We pursue connection through meaningful relationships, giving voice to a child's needs, meeting needs, and teaching through play. And then we encourage self-regulation through attunement or self-awareness, coping skills, and life value terms. So in just a few minutes, actually, in our next section, we'll talk about TBRI, and you can see this briefly here. It's broken out into 3 principles. We talk about connecting, empowering, and correcting. We'll talk about this here in a little bit as well, but we're just briefly going to touch on TBRI today. And so there's a couple of websites that you can look for further information. Child.tcu.edu is where TBRI was developed at the Care and Purpose Institute. Empower2connect.org are our friends in Memphis that are developing lots of great resources around connection and just understanding how to meet your children where they're at. We love Empower to Connect. And then showhope.org, where you can find our resources that dive into this deeper as well. And then for those of you who are here tonight, there's a few copies of The Connected Child out on the desk. This is written by Dr. Karen Purvis, who developed TBRI, and it really just fleshes this out. Would love for you to take that free of charge. So let's just round out our time together. I want to point out 3 truths that we should consider specifically as Christians who want to honor the Lord in our parenting and our broader care for children. So because the most vulnerable among us matter. We see this in Psalm 103, where the psalmist says, "As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust." And then Matthew 12:20-21. "A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope." So you and I need to pay attention so that the amount of expectation and pressure that we're putting on our children is the right amount that helps them to grow rather than breaking them. And then because we're a burden-bearing community, we see this in Galatians 6:2. We bear one another's burdens so that we fulfill the law of Christ. So you may be here getting parenting advice for yourself or encouragement for yourself, but you also need to know, and maybe you're embracing this, maybe more of you need to embrace this, that you could be a caring and safe adult for other children and teens around you too. And you should be, because they need more. We're called to step into difficulties with each other and to lighten the load for our neighbor. And then lastly, because we are a hospitable people. So this is Jesus. They were bringing children to him that he might touch them. And he took them in his arms and he blessed them, laying his hands on them. Mark 10. And then Romans 15:7. "Therefore welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." One of my favorite definitions of hospitality is anticipating needs. So when we think about this in the context of our children, let's anticipate their needs. whether it's in our homes or our churches or schools, and then be equipped to meet them where they're at and help them be successful. And then finally, your parenting will be significantly impacted by two things. So think through this as we continue. The way you were parented will have a big impact on how you parent. And the way that you believe God parents you. So what you think God thinks about you will impact how you approach your children. If you think he's angry with you, if you think he's annoyed with you, if you think he thinks, gosh, you're back here with that again, it's going to impact the way that you parent your children. Our God is a gracious God, steadfast love, rich in mercy, always there when we call for him. And we can be that for our children as well.
Oh, my brain's going to blow up right now. Guys, good
Good.
stuff.
That was the intended effect.
Let's take a little break. You can get your water for a bit. I want to remind you that you can send your questions in right now. Because after a little break here, you're not taking a break, so don't go anywhere. Please don't go anywhere. I'm going to give him a break a little bit, give you a chance to let that, because that's a lot of information. I'm getting texts from my therapist sister. She's not my therapist, but she's a therapist, and she is eating this up. But for those of you like me who don't have this clinical background, this is a lot, but this is why we're doing this. And probably some of you don't have a lot of questions right now because your questions are, so what am I going to do about it? And that's coming in the next part where he goes through TBRI. But while he takes a little break, gets a little water, refreshes up before he comes back on stage, we have our little question and answer time. I want to let you know, that some of you do know this already, we are just now about 15 days from early registration for Marriage for Life 2025. Watch this video. If you aren't excited yet, hopefully you will be in about a minute and a half. Check this out.
There are lots of opportunities in marriage, can't we all agree, to be triggered? I mean, it's just set up for that. For example, sometimes really, really neat and tidy people. People who think everything's got a place and everything should be in its place. A lot of times those types of people will marry normal people. I love my bride, but she's so neat that our junk drawer has dividers, which I've tried to explain to her makes it by its very essence not a junk drawer. Regardless of whether the closeness of marriage has brought you closer together or pushed you farther apart, here's the truth. Close proximity plus personality plus baggage equal your narrative of your spouse. So here's the question. What are you telling yourself about your spouse? Because how you think about your spouse will determine how you treat your spouse.
I'm so excited. I can't wait. Ted Lowe has become a friend of Marriage for Life over the past, I think, you may want to pause that. My bad. He's become a friend of Marriage for Life over the past.
There are lots of opportunities in marriage.
That?
Can't we all agree to be?
There we go. Let me try that again. Yes! I'm so excited. Ted Lowe has become a friend of Marriage for Life over, the past 7 years. He was our last speaker at the Carlisle in Sugar Creek. We were in just a hotel space, and we had reached fire code capacity before moving to Ohio Star Theater, which we hit capacity right away, and before moving over here into Berlin, we're now at the Amish Country Theater. And now he is the first one who's going to be at both sites as we now launch our MFL Cleveland site for the first time this year, up at the Embassy Suites just off Rockside Road, up off of I-77. Yeah, and our team up there they're wonderful, and they can't wait to get this thing launched too. They're going to be able to hold 250 couples on their first night, and we expect that to sell out as well. So just to review, for those of you who know about Marriage for Life, for those of you this is your first time, you're like, what is this Marriage for Life thing? Well, our goal was to provide opportunities for people to experience marriage building events, but to remove obstacles that might be in your way. And those obstacles for us early on with young families was kids. So we made it kind of short, from 7 o'clock at night till noon the next day. You can get babysitter for that amount of time. And we didn't have a lot of money, so we made it cheap. For the first few years, we raised about $2,000, charged $50 or just come for free. Now we raise about $200,000 in private funds every year. And sometimes that's a crazy number, but it's an amazing number that God has provided for us. We charge you just $85 per couple to come, and if you can't afford that, you reach out to us and we will find a way to get you there for free. So money's not an excuse. This is the most important relationship God has given you in this lifetime. So do something little about it now, and then do big things throughout the year to build that relationship. So on October 1, you saw November 1 date up there. On October 1, that's when our marriage builders, our donors who donate as little as $50 a month or $600 a year, or corporations, businesses that support us with either $100 a month or $1,200 a year, or there's many more levels of that, they get early registration because it's been so helpful to us. If you're interested in becoming a marriage builder, you can go online to mfl.family, our website, or you can email Kenny at donate@mfl.family, and he'll help you figure out what are the levels of giving so you can get in on that, so you can register starting October 1st. And we do that also because last year we sold out, I think, all our nights in like 4 hours. Yeah, it was crazy. So you may want to move on that. Another option, too, are our groups. And we've modified our group registration process. So for our groups, they can start applying to bring a group. It'll be groups from 10 to 20. We've limited the sizes of groups this year. But we're going to start that process on October 1st, too. And on our website, which a new website's about to launch here in a little bit, you'll find a link to fill out a Google form where you can apply to become a group that attends. And if you do, that's $160 per couple, which why usually group rates are cheaper, right? Well, this is a little more expensive because this is a way for churches to invest in their couples without paying tens of thousands of dollars to be a sponsor. It's a little extra money at the front to give you early registration so you can all go together to the same hotel, to the same night, and share the experience with other people. That's what's pretty cool. That's why when you're also a marriage builder, you don't just get a chance to come early, but we give you an extra ticket, or depending on how much you give, 2 or 3 or 10 extras, so you can bring people with you to share that experience together. Because when things get tough in your marriage, it's nice to have people alongside you who can say, remember what he said? Remember what you said when you were at the conference? We can fight through this. We can get through this together. So then on November 1st, that's when the crazy starts. At 6 a.m., get online, register for Marriage for Life 2025. And you can register either at Berlin, here at the Amish Country Theater, or you can register for the Cleveland site. It's the same speaker, the same content, all 7 events. 6 events in Berlin, 1 event up in Cleveland. So you don't need to double dip. We don't want you to double dip. That's why we're trying to do so many, so more couples can experience this life-giving event with our friend Ted Lowe. So if you have any questions for us, or any of our team members, you can call us on, that's the same cell phone number there that you can contact us on. You can email us. We'll help you through the process of becoming a marriage builder or becoming a group leader, or just how in the world do I register and get my rooms. Our team would love to help you on that journey. So start setting your clock, set your timer, November 1st, 6 a.m. Don't wake up late. You might regret it. All right, all that being said, come back up here, Justin, because I got some questions for you. I don't think they're too deep because I'm not super deep. But I want to dig in this with you because I think the questions people might have, because this is all really new stuff, this content can be overwhelming, is that I'll first will say, I agree with this because I've been on a journey, as with the team members, all 3 of our executive board families have all adopted and fostered. So we understand this. So I can agree with this stuff. I had one foster kid who had 8 of the 10 ACEs before he came to our house as a teenager. And maybe even 9 ACEs, depending on whether or not the mental illness was a result of drugs or they're both drug-induced and mental illness as well. So he walked in with that. So the sensitivity overload was just, we could see it every single day. Anytime something little would happen, he'd have these knee-jerk reactions. We also had a son who experienced a traumatic incident as a kid. So I guess just thinking through all this stuff with people who may not have been through foster care, who haven't adopted kids, so they haven't experienced a ton of trauma, I guess, can you focus a bit on stuff that happened outside the home? Do traumatic events that kids experience, like my son who lost his leg in a lawnmower accident at 4, maybe a kid who goes to a friend's house and sees a violent incident there, or experiences drug use, he or she herself has not, but have seen friends. Maybe they had a peer who committed suicide. What level of trauma, because those aren't mentioned in the ACEs, how did those affect kids as well?
Yeah, so it's not, like we said, it's not going to be determinative. It just puts them at risk for these outcomes later in life if it's not addressed, because it puts them in a state of survival. So if they have a friend that they go over and they see, that friend's parent is hungover, or that is passed out on the couch and sees drug use. Or if they're going to school and they constantly hear about school shootings. And there's a school shooting in your state, but not in your city. But you had to lock down because it happened, right? Those events aren't directly happening in your midst, but they're impacting you. And so it begins to train children that I'm not safe. And the more situations that they have where they're told, I'm not safe, and there's not somebody to step in to say, no, I've got you. We're going to walk through this together, and they have to face it alone, that's where the higher risk factors come in.
And for those of you who are friends of myself, just this last, 2 or 3 days ago in Marion, Ohio, a kid showed up with a gun at one of our local middle schools. And so that, for those of you maybe back in Marion, this is for real right now. You're experiencing this. And maybe your kids have never seen it before at your home, but whether you're at that school or you're saying any of the local schools around, or you're just reading it in the news and hearing about it, if they're not receiving some kind of reinforcement at home, or they're not processing it at home, then they are potentially at risk. So some of this I'm hearing from you now is not so much we're going to have this healing part with a TBRI, but there is some preventative measures that parents need to be taking. Am I tracking with you?
And I think just to say, we live in a high anxiety society. Yeah. So anxiety is the number one thing that our children face, and that a lot of children are going to therapeutic intervention for, is because they are so overwhelmed with the world that they live in. And you don't have to have a neglectful caregiver to experience that. That's just the world that we live in.
I guess that was part of my next part, because we talk about trauma. We hear the word anxiety a lot. Are we making too much of it? Or sometimes we call anxiety, or like bullying. I mean, I've been through this. We call bullying things that aren't bullying. We call anxiety things that it's worry, but it's not anxiety. We call trauma things that really aren't trauma. But does our society make a bigger deal of this sometimes? Are we overblowing something?
Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. That does happen a lot. But it does not discount when it's really happening, if that makes sense. So, and I think putting these principles into place, if you have a 2-parent household, you're with your kids every night at dinner time, and you are consistent with your kids, there's still something to learn here, because at the heart of it is connection, right? And the heart of it is learning skills of how to live well in the world and to have healthy relationships.
Let me throw one more question and then make one statement of something you said that I thought it's wonderful. The because I'm also, as a parent, I have some kids who haven't gone through trauma, but maybe they have. What role has COVID in that whole journey that seems to like never end? What would you say that was traumatic for some of our kids, and how might we be seeing some of the repercussions of that still playing out?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly in lockdown mode, it was disastrous for kids. I mean, you know that. Kids trying to learn, not being able to connect with others. You cannot connect through a screen. It's good when you can't be in person, but you can't connect through a screen. And just the fear, the constant fear, I'm going to get COVID, or my mom's going to get COVID and she's going to die, because we were just hearing all the time, somebody's dying. I think certainly had huge ramifications. Now, again, if those supports were in place as a child is walking through that, they're impacted by it, but they're not debilitated by it, if that makes sense.
But you are acknowledging in some cases, for parents who may not sense, like my kid never saw me, I don't do drugs, I don't beat them, I don't neglect them. But that was something many kids lived through that is a consideration for dealing with what we're going to be talking about here in the next bit too as well.
Yeah, 100%.
One thing you said, I think, is at the heart of this for parents here and parents at home who are like, well, this isn't my kid, or I'm a young parent, my kid hasn't gone through this, or I haven't seen this yet. I think that word hospitality you gave, I think it's at the heart of this next part of this session. For those of you who don't know anybody going through this stuff right now, we're anticipating needs. Did I define it right?
Yeah.
Anticipating needs. This is something that your kid may go through that's beyond your control. You may have the perfect home, but you can't control everything outside the home. You can't control everything they see, especially as they get older. So if nothing else, you might think, well, this doesn't apply to me right now. Well, if you're a parent, if you are a grandparent or will be one day, you don't know what your kid is going to do eventually later in life with their relationships or with their addictions, if they have any. The best thing to do is take this information, I'm going to preach a little bit for you, and put it in the back of your head. Put it on the back burner. Know this stuff so that when it comes, because more than likely it will, you'll have the tools ready. Fair to say?
Yeah.
I just basically
Here,
said.
Bo.
So I was just say, listen to this man. Even if this first half of this is like, this doesn't make any, because this is so different than anything we have done with our Family for Life event. For the most part, people they get up here, they give you some good tools, but they're inspiring. Hang in there, parents. You're not the worst. You might be bad, but you're not the worst, okay? Hang in there. No one's ever said that before. But this is content that if you might have been at school sometime, the teacher starts talking for the first 2-3 minutes, you're like, I don't get this, and you just check out. Hang in there, okay? Because it's this next part that's gonna be the key that turns, and the tools you're gonna use, if not in the next few months, maybe the next few years. All right? All right, finish this up, and we'll come back. So remember, put it up there one more time, Pat. Here's there you go. Questions. You did put it up. All right, if you have any more questions, my phone is buzzing because questions are coming in. Please give them to me, because when he finishes his next part, I'm going to come up, we're going to talk a little bit more, and I might even give you some of the questions afterwards, and I maybe just email out a lot of people that we've had a part of this and answer some more questions once we're done if we can't get to them all.
Would love to
all
do
right?
that.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you so much. This is so good. So good. Thank you.
Thanks, Bo.